I know dreams are boring, but I keep having this one. It's the day Uncle Ben died. The day I let his killer get away. It's so real. It's different this time. It's a good dream. Today on the Comic Book Report, Spider-Man Life Story. Stick around and check it out. Greetings, webheads. My name is Dominic and you're watching The Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. Today we're taking a look at Chip Zdarsky's Spider-Man Life Story. This is such a unique title and I can't wait to dive in. But before we do, here are a couple quick facts about today's collection. Spider-Man Life Story was written by Chip Zdarsky and illustrated by Mark Bagley. The issues in this collection were initially published for Marvel Comics beginning in 2019. This oversized hardcover collects Spider-Man Life Story issues 1 through 6 and the Spider-Man Life Story Annual Number 1. The volume comes in at 240 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of this book as well as commenting on plot points. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at Spider-Man Life Story, and I have to say I love the classic red and blue design throughout this cover. As I mentioned up at the top, this is an oversized hardcover edition with fantastic glossy paper stock. The spine has some pretty simple font, but it looks really great on a bookshelf. What I love about these oversized hardcovers are they're the height dimensions of omnibuses, just not the level of content as far as page count, but I'm loving that Marvel seems to be putting out more and more of these oversized hardcovers, and I just think they look fantastic. Now let's go ahead and give you a look under that dust jacket. This is another thing I've been seeing from Marvel and DC a lot lately, this under the dust jacket art on their hardcovers. I just think that this is such a great feature and a way to showcase more of the book's art. On this hardcover itself, we have a classic just red cover with Spider-Man looking at his reflection on presumably a skyscraper, or maybe it's webbing. Either way, just a fantastic design. Very, very happy with how this hardcover is presented. I will say you do have a little bit of gutter loss, or at least I have to kind of push the pages down to see some of the corner details on a few of the pages. That being said, it lays flat pretty well, and overall just a really well-made hardcover. As we dive into the book here, I would also just like to say how I found this title. I'd started reading Chip Zdarsky's Daredevil. Daredevil's my favorite character. Really liked what he did there. I wasn't familiar with Chip Zdarsky before that. However, I did hear that he was working on this Spider-Man project, that they looped in Mark Bagley, who is a Spider-Man artist icon, doing some of the 90s, early 2000s Spider-Man, the Ultimate Spider-Man. I love his pencil work for Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Really happy to see him back on a Spider-Man book. Anyway, how the book was sold to me was essentially Spider-Man Life Story starts in the 60s, and it has Peter Parker as a high schooler, and then it goes across the decades of his life up to present, but he actually ages with each subsequent decade. And as we go across each decade in each issue, we also are treated to kind of the greatest hits of Spider-Man from that decade. But we see an interesting alternate history remixed version. As Peter Parker ages, we get to see how his storylines might be impacted by his aging, as well as how it's influenced by some of those other story arcs, if we considered it as just one continuous life. When I heard this pitched to me, I thought that it was such a refreshing premise for a Spider-Man miniseries. Across the pages, we get to see several of the top Spider-Man stories played out in new ways. Things like his origin, the death of Gwen Stacy, the Clone Saga, the birth of Venom, the Marvel Civil War, and so much more. I think one thing that surprised me about Spider-Man Life Story is the tone. There is a general grittiness to it, or realism, that I don't always expect reading a Spider-Man book. We get to see the repercussions of a lot of the tragedies that Peter Parker encounters across his life. I wouldn't say it goes all the way to heavy-handed, but it is real and has a very, very clear sense of weight. At the end of the day, Spider-Man Life Story is its own continuity. It's like a what if, or maybe an Elseworlds kind of idea. Like, what if Peter Parker aged as time chronologically went on? But what if he still encountered all of those beats he encountered throughout the decades, leading from the 60s to present? There is some real imagination here, and the storytelling is top-notch. We get to see some dramatic revelations with the relationships of characters you've known so well within the Spider-Man universe. We get to see Peter Parker grieved, lost loved ones, or really make mistakes that have lifelong consequences. I've heard it said that with some of these premier superhero titles, a problem you can experience with ongoing, never-ending superhero books is that you're perpetually stuck somewhere in Act 2. You never see an Act 3. You never see the finality of the storytelling that bookends the whole chapters of a hero's life, because it's always ongoing. What I like about Spider-Man Life Story is it explores what would be a full arc for Peter Parker's entire life. And it's something new, something rare, and something magnificent to see. What I also really like about Chip Zdarsky and Mark Bagley's Spider-Man Life Story is that at its core, it really is a love letter to Spider-Man fans and Spider-Man in general. And that leads me to some of the strengths of this book, and maybe one of the only drawbacks I would say about this miniseries. Its highs are high. It really checks every appreciable Spider-Man box I can think of as a Spider-Man fan. The characters feel true, the designs are perfect, and the action is amazing. It was like watching the highlight reel of Spider-Man and getting to explore it in fun, unique new ways. But with that, the drawback I would say is for people that do not know a large portion of Spider-Man's history, you might miss out on a lot of the richness of this book. While it is a love letter, it's intimate and has personal details that only Spider-Man fans are really gonna grasp. I do think it can function alone in a vacuum, but you miss out on the caliber of what Zdarsky actually created here, if you don't know a good portion of that history. Swinging back to the art itself, looking at Mark Bagley's work across Spider-Man Life Story, you can tell he put a lot of care into it. Devoted Spider-Man fans have themselves seen Bagley across decades of the character's history. And with that, it's hard to be truly surprised at what he can bring to the title. But that being said, this is some of Bagley's best Spider-Man, in my opinion. The character models are sharp and instantly familiar. And with Bagley being one of my favorite Spider-Man artists, it was great seeing his take on classic Spider-Man moments throughout the character's history. And with the twin efforts of Mark Bagley and Chip Zdarsky, I just have to say, Spider-Man Life Story was emotionally resonant and really got me, choked up at times even. This was very moving storytelling that pulled at my heartstrings as I remembered fondly reading some of the original Spider-Man stories for the first time. And while there were moments when reading this that I hoped the tone could be a little cheerier or more lighthearted, the sense of tragedy and realism just hit harder. When I'm reading Spider-Man Life Story, I'm reading something that is true to the core of this character. And as a Spider-Man fan, it's really hard to ask for more. And after the stories, we get treated to a beautiful cover art gallery that you're seeing now. I love looking at some of the extras, some of the blurbs you can see. This is really just a really well-crafted edition that I'm so happy to have on my bookcase. And that's going to do it for this deluxe hardcover of Spider-Man Life Story. Now I think it's time we give this book a grade. For a truly amazing Spider-Man story that is simultaneously a love letter to old readers and something refreshingly new, The Comic Book Report is proud to give Spider-Man Life Story an A-. It's rare to know when you're holding a new classic in your hands, but this book leaves no doubt. Have you read Life Story? Let me know in the comments below. And with that, this has been The Comic Book Report. Thank you for watching. Consider giving me a subscribe, and have a good one.